Hello and welcome to another episode of Trash to Track. Now in this episode I'm going to be looking at this Mainline Manor class loco that's been sent to me by John. Now John said that this was running fine and then all of a sudden abruptly stopped and he hasn't been able to get it to run since. The axles are split and he's bought his own replacement axles and quartered the wheels himself. So we'll have a look at all that later, but he is right, it's not running at all on the battery test. It's completely dead. So we'll take this apart and see what's what. To undo the model, you need to undo the screw under the footplate. And then there's one under the smoke box door, just under this front pony wheel here, or the front bogie. And then the chassis and body will separate. Now you have to be careful with the Manor because there's a lubrication pipe work on the side rods. However, when I took the body off, that broke away anyway. So I'm not sure if it was broke before, but testing it with a battery direct to the motor, and the motor runs. So there's obviously a problem getting electric from the pickup wheels to the motor. Removing the base plate allows me to remove the wheels. And we've got the standard split chassis setup. Now applying power to the two halves of the chassis, and the motor is not running at all. So there's a connection issue between the motor and the chassis, or a short circuit issue, one or the other. So we're going to have to strip this down and see what's going on. Now on the Manor class you have to undo these two screws at the front which release the cylinder block and the chassis extension, because this chassis is used for numerous models, but with the extension in place it's used for the Manor class. So undoing those allows this piece to slide away. And then to separate the two halves of the chassis you have to undo this screw here, and also two screws in the motor. Now there's the 4 screws in the motor in total, 2 in each chassis half, and they hold the motor in place. But undoing 2 will allow the chassis to be separated, and we'll have a look at what's going on. So there we go. Inside here is also a big plastic insulation part that acts as the screw anchors for the extension that we looked at a moment ago. So it looks like it's quite oily and greasy. Now I've undone all the screws and got the motor out. Now the motor is a runner. As a standalone item, the motor is running. And it's running rather nicely, although I am going to service it anyway, just as a matter of course. So there's quite a lot of plastic filings here where they've screwed it in and it's broke the plastic in the past. So undoing these brush retainers. Now when you do this, put your thumb over the end, because if you undo these without that, the springs will fly off and you will lose them. But doing it this way allows you to keep the springs in check. That spring is slightly damaged and the other one was even worse, so I'm going to replace both brush springs in this model. I know it worked, but they're both damaged, so it's worth replacing them if you can. Both brushes were stuck inside there as well. And then to separate the two motor halves, you have to undo these final 2 screws at the top, which will allow the motor to separate. Now the commutator is not too dirty, but I am going to clean it with a cotton bud that's been soaked in contact cleaner. So I'll clean it all up, make sure it's as clean and as nice and tidy as can be. I then clean the other half of the motor, get all the carbon deposits off where the brushes have been working. Make sure this is nice and clean, ready for reassembly. And once everything is thoroughly cleaned, reassembly can commence. Now I put the 2 motor halves back together. They are really simple to work on, these motors. Put the 2 halves back together, screw them back how they should be. The one thing I noticed, sometimes on a mainline model you get these tiny little fibre washers inside there, but this one didn't have any. So the motor halves are back together, and now I've cleaned the brushes. Brushes go in, and then the replacement springs I put it on top, and then again holding them in place with my thumb when I can find the spring. It's right there. The spring's there, man. Look, it's there. What on earth? I just can't see it for looking. There we go. Finally found it. No. The brush retainer on this model was quite loose, so I just had to turn it so it was facing the right way. I didn't want to glue it. I didn't want to danger getting any glue inside the motor, so it'll be okay when it's screwed in place. So the brush retainer goes back on and sits in the 2 grooves. Now I've found the spring again. Holding that in place and lining the screw hole up, I can replace the screw and tighten it up. Again, it's easy to hold this in place. If you don't, you risk pinging that spring across the room and it will be lost forever. But once both brushes and both springs and terminals are screwed back in place, it's time to test the motor. And it ran before, so I assume it will run now, and you'll be able to see that. There we go. You can see the motor turning. The only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a tiny amount of oil just to put on the shaft there that comes out the back and the one in the front that sit in tiny bearings. So that's all correctly lubricated. So I'm now going to clean the chassis up. The gears were cleaned up again, cotton bud soaked in contact cleaner. But the grease on this was horrible stuff. It was almost like somebody had oiled this with the dreaded 3-in-1 oil. That is not the oil you want to be using on your models, but this stuff took a lot of getting off. And in the end, I put the chassis halves on some blue cloth and gave them a liberal coating of contact cleaner to clean all the old oil and grease away. And I work in there, look, with a cotton bud, just cleaning it all off. It seemed to be everywhere. Both chassis halves seemed to be covered in a film of this horrible, hard to clean oil. And it's funny, I know a lot of people won't work on mainline split chassis stuff anymore, but I always find it interesting because no two are the same. That no two split chassis models that I've worked on have been the same. They all wear differently and they all seem to throw up different problems. So you can see I'm just thoroughly cleaning everything, and now it's time to start reassembly. And the motor goes in this way and the gears are underneath there. Now I have put some grease on the gears. I'm just holding that in place there because I need to screw it in from this side. So putting the screws back in there, they are magnetic, but they wouldn't sit properly on the screwdriver. They never do when you're filming. But these 2 screws were replaced. And then I can rebuild the gear train now that the motor's held firm. And I do put a small amount of grease on the gear spindles. The gears go back in like so, making sure they turn nice and freely. And then a small amount of this white hobby grease, PTFE grease, on the gear treads. And when that works round, that will go through the drivetrain. And I just turn it by hand when I can get it lined up correctly, that is. I just turn it by hand gently so that it spreads through. And then with the force of the motor, it won't fly, it won't fling the grease everywhere because it's already coated on the drivetrain. When you put the 2 chassis halves back together, remember to put that plastic piece in that the extension screws to. Then the other chassis half can go on. And now everything's been thoroughly cleaned. I'm hoping that when we go to test this, it will work. I'm just pushing that plastic insulator through and then replace the 2 screws that hold the motor together and the small screw that goes in the bottom left hand corner there. So once all that's done, the chassis extension piece was put in, just like so, and these 2 larger screws are screwed through the top, and the plastic part that we saw insulates those screws from both halves of the chassis. And it's quite a good design, really. It allowed Mainline to use this chassis on numerous models. Now, turning my attention to the wheels, John said that he didn't think he'd quartered these wheels correctly, but I thoroughly examined them, and to be fair, he's done a really, really good job. There was 1 or 2 minor adjustments that I made just to smooth the running out a little bit. But to be fair to him, these wheels are quartered correctly. I didn't have to do the adjustments. It just solved a little bit of jerky running. So to ensure good conductivity, again, the wheels and axles would need a good clean. And this is because the wheels pass the current through the axle stubs to the chassis, and then the wheel treads were given a thorough clean. Although, to be honest, as you can see on the cotton bud, there isn't much in the way of dirt on these at all. They are very clean. So I am going to reassemble the wheels into the chassis to try and test this properly. And you have to get the slide bars, the piston rods in the slide bars, and then the cylinder rod, piston rod into the cylinder, just like that. And you have to do it on both sides, and it is a bit finicky. It is a little bit finicky, but it does tend to be like if you get it in one side, it will fall out the other. But persistence pays off, and it will go in, and then the wheels just drop in place. So to aid these split chassis models, especially with Mainline, what I do is I add a small amount of this Pico Electrolube. This is conductive oil, and a small drop on each axle will help conduct electricity when this model is picking up power. The chassis plate is then put back in place, and the 2 screws we removed from the chassis plate are reinserted and screwed in to hold this all together. And I'm hoping now that when we put this on the test track, it is a runner, because I've not tested it yet. So putting it on the track with a battery, it does indeed spark into life. So at this point in the rebuild, I'm thinking it was over-oiling or a build-up of old oil and grease that was preventing the motor from making good contact with the chassis, because this motor, the brush terminals reach underneath, and each one connects with a different half of the chassis. The body shell was dusted over. There is a whistle missing on this body shell, but I'll replace that with one out of my spares box. And then once the body shell is replaced, I'm going to clean the front pony wheels, because these were quite dirty. They'd obviously picked up the majority of dirt when this model had been running round. So you can see there just how much dirt there is on the cotton bud. And then I turned my attention to the tender. Now, the tender wheels were horrendously dirty. You can see there just how dirty they are and just how clean they're coming up. And the amount of crud that is on that cotton bud now just by doing 2 of the wheels. So this really did need a thorough clean. The only other thing I did to the tender was to dust it, and then that was done. So then it was bench tested, and John's Manor, as you can see, is running rather nicely, backwards and forwards. However, when I took this to the model shop to give it a spin on their test track to run it, it wouldn't go. It was dead. It did half a lap and died. So it's back on the workbench, and I stripped it all down again to see what the problem was. And I was beginning to think one of the coils had gone on the motor, but leaving it set up like this, the motor was spinning round for a good 20 minutes in each direction with no fault at all. And I found this. Now, one of these, as I said, one of the brush terminals, they have arms that reach around and touch the chassis. This one here was intermittent, and the vibration of the motor was causing a loss of power. And I fixed this by wedging this hole here with tin foil. A very Heath Robinson repair, but I have done this before. And the chassis will not solder. So if you pack that with tin foil and then cover with insulation tape, that will prove good conduct, good electrical conduct between the chassis half and that brush terminal. And then the Manor was on the rolling road on the backrest saddles, again for 20 minutes in each direction, and it didn't falter once. So the problem with this was that because of age and wear, when the model was running and the motor was vibrating, that small brush terminal was making intermittent contact with its chassis half, which was proving to be poor for running quality. So packing that with tin foil, and you can see here it's running lovely. And there we go. I found a whistle which I glued in the front, in the top, sorry, just to replace the one that was missing. So that's John's Manor rebuilt and thoroughly working, if not a bit of a Heath Robinson repair, but I have done that before, and tinfoil can have its uses, as it is obviously metal and it is conductive. And it is especially good on chassis like this, which do not take solder. But for its age, the Manor class isn't too bad. It's been eclipsed by ones from Accurascale and Dapol now. But for a budget model of the Great Western Manor class, the Mainline model really does hold up. you know, when it's running. So it's back to Trains for You, and you can see here the Manor running around on their test layout. If you've got an engine or anything you need repairing, DCC fitting, or want to make a donation, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. Have a look and get it sent over, and who knows, it may even feature in an episode all of its own. So I'll leave you now with some shots of the Manor running around on a small freight train and the Trains for You test layout. Thanks again for watching Trash to Track. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Bye for now. It's going to be a long hour and a quarter if it's like this. £600 worth of trees.